Good morning. It is time for the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com. And now your host, Mike Hewitt. Good morning, Mike.
Hey, good morning, Brian Thomas. And in the studio with us is Matt Wiedenhoff, who I often refer to as Ludwig von Wiedendorsky, and of course Pax. On the line with us, well, first off, let me tell you, we've got a pretty busy show today. We're going to have John Yob, who's on the line with us, and I'll introduce him in just a second. But after John is going to be the Michigan Senator Patrick Colbeck, and then after that, the ENIGMA report. And I was an enigma to me what I would subtitle it. Why do we always do this backwards or the wrong end of the stick? So we'll have to figure that out when we get there. But listen, without further ado, John Yob is president of Strategic National, which is a nationally recognized political consulting firm. And John is also the author of Chaos, The Outsider's Guide to a Contested Republican Convention 2016. John Yob, welcome back to the Mike Hewitt Show.
Thanks, Mike. Glad to be with you this morning.
Hey, John, tell us, what is this book about? Tell me all about it.
Sure. Well, as you know, I have a history with working on conventions, both at the state level and the national level. I ran the delegate operations. I was national political director for McCain in 2008, for Santorum in 2012, and Rand Paul in 2016. And so as the race was developing, it became clear to me that we were headed to a contested national convention. The reasons for that on the macro level are just the changes that's happened in the party in the last decade, from the proliferation of social media and online fundraising to the strength of the outsider side of the spectrum and the rise of the Tea Party, to the micro reasons that are relevant in this particular cycle. For example, having a very wide and experienced field, a deep field, probably the strongest field we've had in a generation, as well as RNC rules changes that have made a contested convention more likely as it relates to delegate binding, the proportional versus winner-take-all allocation of delegates, and ultimately ballot access. So it became pretty clear to me that we were headed towards a contested convention, and people don't really understand what a contested convention means and how that would work. And so I thought it made a lot of sense to put out an outsider's guide to the convention so that anybody who's interested in learning more about how a contested convention will work can buy the book and become an expert. Very, very nice.
Tell me this, John. When I posted the announcement that you'd be on today's show with this book as our topic, a couple of people pushed back, some of them publicly, a couple of them were Facebook messages to me. And by the way, that's one of the questions I want to ask you is what impact Facebook and social media has had on political parties in total. But that said, their automatic response was Trump is going to absolutely run the table, so there's no dispute with the convention. What say you?
Well, I would say that I think Trump is the only candidate who could win without a contested convention. There is virtually no path, and there hasn't been for quite some time. This isn't new with Nevada. And so, I think Rubio and Cruz and Kasich really can't win without a contested convention. Now, Trump could possibly win without a contested convention, but it's really, really hard to do. Like I saw one comment on your Facebook page that said that he was going to have a majority after March 1st. It's possible that he has a majority of those that have already been determined. I would say that's even unlikely because of the size of the field and because there's very few winner-take-all states that go on March 1st or 15th. So it's possible he has a majority of those that have already been decided, but there's no chance that he'll have a majority of the actual delegates to the national convention. So it's going to be a long time before he gets to a majority. But I think, even then it's likely to be a contested convention with 4 candidates winning delegates, 5 candidates winning delegates. It's going to be hard to get to a majority, and I think we're going to go to a contested convention.
And most of the March, by the way, I made note of that comment on my Facebook page also, but most of the March 1st states are southern states. And so while he may or may not win them, that's what the future will tell. To your point, it's not going to be dominant like it was in Nevada. And unless something dramatically changes, all of that aside, it looked like us. We were talking before we went live this morning here in the studio. It looks like to us that maybe there's some kind of deal getting ready to be hatched between Trump and Rubio. Have you been following that?
Yeah, I haven't been following that at all. Between Trump and Rubio, no, I haven't been following that at all. I do think that it's likely that the candidates end up teaming up before you get to Cleveland. So I'm not saying which candidates I think will team up or whether they'll all team up, but I think you will see some level of teaming up. I think it's just naturally what happens as you begin making your decisions for the purposes of delegate math.
Take a look at this morning's Today Show. In their opening few minutes, they had Trump online. He was, frankly, shocking to me. He was almost complimentary to Rubio and kind of even ratcheted up his attack on Cruz. It was a different kind of Donald. It sure looked to me from this morning, and of course you don't pick the Today Show, the most watched morning show in the country, in the first 10, 15 minutes to do this without some thought, although who knows about Donald. But nonetheless, it looked to me like there was a lot of making up with the Rubio supporters. And if you had to pick where the combinations are going to come from, like I said, take a look at the Today Show. I'd predict fairly soon that you would see some kind of an announcement between Rubio and Trump.
That would really surprise me. I think
surprised me.
I think it's more a function of which states are upcoming. Texas is on March 1st and Florida is on March 15th. And so I think, Trump has always done a pretty good job of targeting the guy who he needed to defeat next. And so I think that
that's good.
The Texas primary is what's on his mind right now. He feels like if he can beat Cruz in Texas, and that puts Texas out, that puts Cruz out of the race, and then he's got to come back on March 15th and win Florida and Ohio to put Rubio and Kasich out of the race.
I think you're exactly right, John. I'm looking at the March 1st lineup. You've got Texas in there, and then as I mentioned earlier, most of the other states, with the exception of Massachusetts and Minnesota, most of the other states are southern. So it makes a lot of sense for him to really pound Cruz right now, and that makes sense.
Yeah, there's no path for Cruz after March 1st if he doesn't do well on March 1st. So he's on the ropes right now. In terms of March 1st states. Now, he could come out strong. If he wins Texas and wins a couple other these states, then he'll be in a strong second place in the delegate math, and he'll be right back in the race. So, but certainly, he's up to bat next.
Yeah, tell us this, John. What would a chaos? I love it. What would a chaos convention look like?
Well, the convention is going to be chaos no matter what because of the rules. So, for example, the RNC implemented a new rule last time. It was a rule to try to keep Ron Paul off the ballot, or even Rand Paul for that matter, the next time around. But they implemented a rule called Rule 40B, which mandates that you need a majority, not a plurality, a majority of 8 states in order to make the national convention ballot. Now, given that only 9 states total in the whole country are winner-take-all, it'd be very, very hard to have a majority of 8 states. Just as an example, Donald Trump won Nevada huge last night, but he doesn't have a majority of the delegates in Nevada. As of the current count, he only got 14 of the 30. So, for example, Nevada, even after that big resounding victory, he did not win it by enough in order for it to be a ballot access state for him. So it's going to be very, very hard for any candidate to make the ballot. Therefore, there'll be attempts to change the rules relative to ballot access, which obviously will get people's attention and will lead to some level of chaos. There's also the issue of binding. The RNC over the last few cycles, really starting in 2008, has tried to tweak the rules relative to binding. And what binding is, it means the delegates have to vote the way that they're allocated through their primary or caucus process. Historically, delegates haven't gone along with how their states have voted, and there's been a lot of delegate stealing. And I use the term in the book called SINOs, supporter in name only, to define delegates who actually support a different candidate than who they were elected as delegates to support. But there'll be a lot of controversy related to binding. There'll be some candidates who try to get rid of the binding rules. In the past, it was deemed helpful for the establishment to have the binding of delegates because they thought their candidates would do better in primary contests than in the state convention contests where the delegates are chosen. But now, as Donald Trump wins these primaries and caucuses, I have this sneaky suspicion you're going to see the establishment and the Rubio people arguing against binding and allowing the delegates to have their own choices so that they can compete in the state conventions across the country.
Just for the sake of listeners, John, who do you define as the establishment? Is it the people with the big money that write checks, or is it party elected leadership? Who is the establishment?
Well, from a national perspective, it's a conglomeration of the donors, party operatives, elected officials, and consultants who all work together and decide to go along with whoever they think, in their view, is in the best interests of themselves and the party. People who support the establishment do what they think is in the best interests of themselves and the party, and I think people who support outsiders want enough change in order to change the direction of the country and don't necessarily make decisions based on groupthink. And so I would say it's a conglomeration of the elected officials, party leaders, consultants, and vendors at the national level. And
grassroots tends to be us folks that are the ones that are actually putting signs out and calling people, and volunteers like me. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, sure. But the good news is that you're in the majority now. You know, in the past, when they were called conservatives rather than outsiders, the conservatives, only ended up having 30, 40% or so of the electorate, and then they'd have three candidates trying to divide up that 30 or 40%, whereas the establishment would figure out a way to get everybody in line and would only have one candidate that would get all 55 or so percent. This time around, you've got the establishment dividing it up just as much or more as the outsiders, and then simultaneously, you've got the outsider side of the spectrum having a larger portion of the electorate. So the good news is outsiders are winning.
John, I got a question for you. So, and this also is from a friend of mine, because they ask me this question every time I see them. And if we're doing these caucuses and primaries, it sounds to me like some of these votes don't matter when we get to the convention, when you're talking about these brokered conventions. Is that a good assessment or no?
Well, they didn't used to matter. Now, when we talk about the rules aren't actually set until the convention convenes. So there's some proposed rules that'll be put forward by the RNC Rules Committee to the Convention Rules Committee. The Convention Rules Committee will be made up of Rules Committee members, two from each delegation, that are elected by the National Convention delegates rather than appointed by the RNC chairman. So it'll be a very much independent Rules Committee that will generally be in tune with the delegates to the convention. That Rules Committee will determine whether there is binding and for how long binding exists. Does binding exist for one ballot, two ballots, five ballots, or does binding not exist at all? Binding means that a delegate has to vote the way they're allocated through their primary or caucus process. If they throw out binding at the national level, then there's still state-level rules in various states that have binding. Now, a lot of people, probably myself included, believe that the state-level binding rules ultimately are not enforceable at a national convention because the national convention is the supreme authority, and nobody, even the courts for that matter, nobody can implement their will over the national convention. And so the answer to that question all comes down to how the Rules Committee decides to vote before the convention. What I will say is that there is nothing more important to a contested convention than the election of the delegates. For example, if Donald Trump wins Michigan running away and wins, most of the 59 delegates for Michigan, the people who are elected at the state convention, as you guys know, will have their own minds, and in some cases, people who didn't actually support Trump in the primary will run as Trump delegates. Now, if there's binding on the first, and this happened famously in 2000 when the Bush people stole all of McCain's delegates, and it happened around the country in the last few cycles with Ron Paul being aggressive in that manner as well. But it becomes important, even if there's binding. If there's no binding, it obviously matters because the vote total changes. But even if there is binding, it matters greatly because those people will be picking members of the Rules Committee and the Credentials Committee. So if, let's say, John Smith doesn't support Trump but is elected as a Trump delegate, then he's unlikely to vote with the Trump campaign in the election of Rules Committee members and ultimately the implementation of the rules. And therefore, even separate from the actual vote for president and vice president, the true feelings and hearts and minds of those delegates who are elected matters greatly.
Fascinating. Listen, just John, we're out of time, but before we go, a couple of things. First off, I'm looking at Amazon.com right now. I'm looking at your book. I just bought it. I bought it while you were talking. It was that easy, folks. Along with that, you've got a number of positive. In fact, they only allow 5 stars. All the comments on this book are 5 stars and very, very nice comments. I'll be spending this evening reading it, and folks, I encourage you to, if you really want to understand this process, I encourage you to buy it also. Is it available in the bookstores? Is it online, John? How do people find it beyond what I just said?
Yeah, right now it's available on Amazon. It will be in bookstores in about 3 weeks. It's very hard to do a book about real-time activities as things change. Things are different today than they were last week. So we'll be doing some updates to the book as well. The version that's up there right now is the unedited version. There'll be another version up there in about 2 weeks. But I would urge you to go to conventionchaos.com to learn more about the book, or go to Amazon and type in Convention Chaos.
And if you do get it on Amazon, I checked it myself also. They do automatic updates. So as you make changes, if you want to be first in line to get this information, go to Amazon. It's, frankly, I think, very reasonably priced. And as you make updates, those things will come automatically if you set it up on Amazon.
Well, I bought it.
Exactly right.
I bought it. Listen, John Yob, as we go forward in this election process, I hope to have you rejoin us, because I can't think of a more knowledgeable person, especially in our region. So thank you very, very much for joining us this morning.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate the time.
Okay, folks, we'll be right back with Senator Patrick Colbeck.
And now we return to the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com and your host, Mike Hewitt.
Hey, folks, just to bring you up to speed, we got Jim Riley riding shotgun at the other end of the wagon. Ludwig von Wiedendorsky is in between us, and Pax is keeping an eye on everything, helping Brian Thomas. Listen, folks, on the line with us is Michigan State Senator Patrick Colbeck. Senator Colbeck is also the chair for Michigan for the Ted Cruz for President campaign. Senator Colbeck, welcome back to the Mike Hewitt Show.
Hey, great to be with you, Mike.
Listen, it seems like this election cycle evolves every day, and sometimes even by the minute.
Yeah.
And,
Keep your hands and feet in the ride at all times.
I'm telling you, you're exactly spot on with that, and it is just filled with turns. And John Yob came before you, and he's still convinced that there'll be a challenged or contested convention, but time will tell that. Listen, we've got March 1st right in front of us with, what are there, 8 or 11 states, I think, coming up. What's the path forward for Senator Cruz?
Well, first of all, we need to recognize that Donald Trump has not gotten a majority of the votes in any one of the states yet. That means the majority of people are not picking him right now. Now, I will be perfectly honest and say, well, that doesn't mean that the majority are picking Ted Cruz yet either. But the path to victory, I think, is pretty straightforward. And just for your listeners, on the way into Lansing today, I was driving past this church that I pass by every single day on 23. And today, up on their message board that they had, it said that the lowest ebb signals the rising tide. And that's what I think is going to be happening on Super Tuesday. And over 600 delegates of the 1,237 that are needed to win the Republican nomination are up for grabs on Super Tuesday. And I think we're positioned pretty well. I think there's a total of 13 states involved, and some of these states include Texas, which is a Cruz stronghold, and Oklahoma, and Arkansas, and Alabama, and Georgia. We're looking for good things to happen for the Cruz campaign, and I'm pretty excited about that. Being used as a springboard coming into Michigan on March 8th, where we have 59 delegates up for grabs.
We were talking about it before we went on this morning, and then a little bit with John Yob earlier, and I'd be remiss not to ask you, but it sounded a little bit early this morning to at least Jim Riley and I, who had both been listening to, was it Good Morning America, Jim?
To the Today Show.
Today Show. I can't tell one from another, but At any rate, and they were interviewing Trump, and frankly, he sounded very conciliatory, is the right word, with Rubio, and just double the bashing on Cruz. Is there a deal in the works there?
No, I think what you're seeing is a threat. He knows that Cruz is all about a movement. And
right.
The folks that are supporting Ted, like myself, are the ones that are tapping into the same vein that Trump is doing, except we're doing it in a manner that I believe is more presidential, if you will. and so there's a lot of folks that are angry about what's going on.
Sure.
The folks that are want to do it via the Constitution know that Ted's the guy. They're the folks that want to restore America, not fundamentally transform it. And the folks that are tapping into Donald Trump, it's this pure anger going on. And so Trump is most threatened by Cruz, frankly. And you'll see the connection up with Rubio because Trump is trying to now court the establishment votes as well to try to put Cruz out of his misery once and for all. So it's a calculated strategy to you fix your enemy and then you surround them and then you try to get rid of them. And I'm proud to be on the Cruz campaign because we've got a footprint in all 50 states, and this is not something that's going to be going away anytime soon because we've got a lot of very good people working for us. We've got over 4,000 volunteers in Michigan alone.
To your point about anger, that really resonates even on maybe especially on a grassroots level. I watch Facebook.
And it resonates with me.
You betcha. Listen, I watch Facebook. In fact, we joked a little bit last week on the show that if I say, or it doesn't matter who I like, by the way, if I say I like X or I didn't like what Trump said on one particular issue, man, talk about anger. The support, I'll unfriend you, I'll block you, I'm going, what?
I know.
What happened? But listen, in defense of everybody that gets that way, when I look back at Facebook in election cycles gone by, and I literally did this because I'm thinking, is this a new something? And there's always been a certain level of angst in devoutness to a candidate is maybe the wrong word, but I'll use it anyway.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing. One thing
it is very interesting, and it's kind of like we're very active in social media on the Cruz campaign. We don't have the luxury of getting free media,
no,
like on the Today Show and the GMA and Fox News, like Mr. Trump does. So we have to do it the grassroots way, which is via social media. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And I hate to be snarky. I like Cruz, by the way. I like that he can actually say an entire sentence. So.
You noticed that too.
Shame on me for saying it that way, but some of the stuff, regardless of who people are supporting, you got to stand back a little bit and do the man in the mirror thing, and be honest. And so I think those differences are very, very blunt and in your face differences. Now, folks may not want to hear it, but it is the reality of it.
It's right. And Mike, you've been following me for quite a while and what I've been doing up in the Senate. And, you know, I've taken some tough stands on some issues that, just like Ted's taken tough stands up in D.C. As a matter of fact, the Dems in my last race called me Michigan's Ted Cruz. And so
that's good. That's kind of nice.
It gets a little frustrating right now. And the part that's really interesting for me is that, you know, while Ted's been fighting this fundamental transformation of America that President Obama has been pushing, all the other candidates that are up on that stage with them have been enabling it, and, you know, in different ways. So Trump's been doing it by funding both Boehner, McConnell, and Pelosi and Reid. He's been funding it and trying to play power broker in that arena and doing so successfully. You have Rubio, who's actually going off and promoting illegal amnesty after he told the voters in Florida that he would not do that. And you got Kasich, who's actually for Medicaid expansion, for Common Core, all these things that we're trying to fight because they're fundamental to this fundamental transformation here. And Cruz is standing alone in the breach fighting all this stuff. And so all the folks that are marshaling and focusing their anger on Trump because they think he's an outsider, the facts tell a completely different story.
Right.
He's about as inside as they get.
It's one of those fascinating things because we'll say on one hand, grassroots people at my level, I'm the guy that puts the signs out and makes the phone calls. People at my level will often say that we resent or push back against the money in politics, and we'll talk about a politician voted for that.
Right.
Let's look at his contributions, or he voted for this. Let's look at the contributions.
Yeah.
But somehow we somehow a lot of us have been able to not be worried about the fact that Donald has been the guy with the checkbook. So it's okay. It's okay to write the check, but it's not okay to take the check. And
exactly.
I have a tough time with that. Candidly, I really do. To me,
and they ignore the fact that a lot of Cruz's contributions have come from over 800,000 unique donations. That's not coming from the big money folks. That's coming in on an average of $67 per donation per voter. So I mean, it's completely out of kilter with reality, with the perception, if you will, around Donald Trump. I don't get it. Cruz is the guy that's got the broad-based appeal.
But listen, but we've seen elections in the past, Senator, where you'll have 3 conservatives or 2 conservatives or whatever number of conservative candidates pound each other into the dirt, and the more moderate person seems to ride off into the chair. And I'm very concerned about that. Because
I am too.
History
paints. I'm more concerned that people think Trump is a conservative, frankly. But he's wherever the wind is blowing and wherever he thinks he can get the most traction. So it is kind of interesting.
You know the old thing that folks often vote their wallet, and so when people listen to my position, some folks that I genuinely like are very angry with me for being a Cruz supporter. But listen, I'm like everybody else. I vote my wallet, and I own it. Who sponsors this show is Renegade River, which is a federally licensed gun store. And so when I hear somebody, and I have to paraphrase it, so everyone don't shoot me. It's not a quote. But when I hear somebody say, "I'm against gun control, but I would like a longer waiting period and a ban on ARs," that scares the bejeebers out of me, because I think and by the way, that's not a 30-year-old quote. That's only a couple-year-old quote. Right along with the idea that Hillary Clinton was the best Secretary of State in history. I rail hard against those kind of comments.
I know. It'd be nice if people actually ran on their record, because if they did, Cruz obviously was a guy who won the Heller case, which anybody in the Second Amendment land like I am and you are, I appreciate the fact that he kept our rights. And if you, that's pretty powerful. But you notice anytime Ted wants to talk about the record and get into the detailed policy issues, what happens? Rubio and Trump say liar, liar.
Right.
And they don't say why he lied. They don't give the example of it. They just sit there and make the accusation. And, you know, with the media just parroting that in all their segues for all their shows, it sticks. It's like flashing popcorn on a screen in a movie theater.
It does. Listen, Trump and Rubio both have been very, very good at defining Senator Cruz. And the problem with that is, and I believe this passionately, folks, I think it's our civic duty for all of these candidates to dig in and to get past the sound bites and get past the campaign imagery where we all clap like penguins because we like this commercial or that commercial. Folks, I think it's a civic duty to dig in and make sure that you're voting your conscience, because I think that's what makes America stronger. Even if we disagree, by the way, I support you if you can look me in the eyeballs and tell me you did that.
Exactly. I agree wholeheartedly. And it's my hope that a lot of your listeners will do just that and actually go off and look at the records of the individual candidates. You know, Donald Trump may be for stuff that you like today, but I think it's just as fair to look at what his positions were in the past. And I think when you look and find out is that Cruz has been pretty darn consistent across his whole spectrum of service, and the number one person he's trying to serve is the people that elect him into office here. It's not. He's not trying to do self-promotion at all, and I really respect that. I've met him, spent significant time with him and his family, and I got to tell you, he's one of those guys that is the real deal. He's not doing this for grandstanding. He's doing it to get our country back restored to those constitutional principles that made us the best country in the world.
Senator, question for you, because my uncle's actually goes to the church that Cruz's father's the pastor of, their neighbors and they're good friends. So I've always been partial to him. But one of the concerns I have, and maybe this is the media portraying it, is that what he did with the Ben Carson thing in Iowa, and then the most recent tweet, is the media making a bigger deal out of this than what it really is?
Absolutely. I mean, when you actually look at what happened, when you get down to the technicalities, the only thing that Cruz could be faulted for, or frankly, it's the Cruz team because he wasn't even directly involved in this, is not going off and putting out or following the Twitter feed from the guy on CNN to actually go off and provide a correction to a actual CNN media broadcast, which, by the way, highlighted that everything that they retweeted, it turned out to be true. Carson did not go to New Hampshire, did not go to South Carolina. He went back home to get a fresh set of clothes. And to pigeonhole that and say that Cruz is somehow a liar for that, it just defies any rational grasp of what actually happened. So
I agree.
It's very frustrating.
You know what, Senator, I agree with you, but I'll go you a step further on that. I've always liked Ben Carson. I really have.
I do too.
In fact,
Yeah.
earlier in the segment with John Yob, I was complimenting Ben Carson. I think he's a really good guy. That said, I think he lost a lot of folks' favor, including mine, when he tried to wring that out for a week and a half. Anyone that's actually been engaged, and I know you have, obviously, that's how you got to be a senator, but anyone that's ever been engaged in a personal election campaign, they're sitting there on election night when they're collecting. Listen, folks, it is extremely, extremely intense. I've been there. I've been the candidate.
Right.
Folks,
you get that text, and you immediately put your phone in your pocket, and you find all the Carson supporters you can find.
I'm telling you, that's what anybody would do, and anyone that says they wouldn't, they're the liars. I mean, it's just the facts of it. I don't know what the man called him on a personal basis and apologized. He apologized to him on national television. I don't know what else he can do other than to say, I'm a human and so are you.
Well, the that was put out there was in serious financial straits. I understand that he was actually running behind. He was actually running a deficit at that point to the tune of around $700,000 right after the big hullabaloo. And you saw that, first of all, Dr. Carson started focusing on CNN as a bad guy.
Right.
But then he changed his tune and started focusing on Cruz and used that for fundraising, because I'm on the mailing list for that. I got fundraising notices specifically calling that out.
Right.
And so I'm a little frustrated by that being rather disingenuous, if you will, because he knew what I have to believe, especially with Ted reaching out to him afterwards, he had to know the facts of the situation as well. So while I really like him, I would get a little frustrated by what happened in the wake of the Iowa caucus, because Ted shouldn't have been riding that on a wave going into New Hampshire, and he did to a certain extent. But this continued pummeling by not just Trump, not just Rubio, but also by willing media out and particularly Fox News, it gets a little frustrating.
You know, I often joke when people say, why am I so invested in politics? I'll say that's the real contact sport, okay?
Yeah, it certainly is.
And what folks have to know is when you, as a candidate, and you know this also, when you get yourself that financially invested in your first race, it isn't about fat cats writing you checks, because 99.99% of all state level and up candidates start on their own dime. Matt Wiedenhoff has been a candidate. He's nodding up and down like a Cheshire cat right now. Listen, you get very, very personally invested financially. And time. I mean, time is extreme. I'm not getting paid for anything for serving as chair for the Cruz campaign. I'm doing it because I really believe that we need to get our country back in order. And and so you do get very invested. You really do. Now, all of these candidates had other careers, and most of them have either suspended, quit, and I don't know about, I shouldn't say all of them. I know that you and I have both quit our job to spend our life savings because we believe in something. And listen, so I tell folks, the listeners, that because it may give you a clue into why it is that folks take these things so personally and so intensely. Did you ever read the book by David McCullough, 1776? I did, yes. Yeah, well, you know the bloody stump discussion, right, on their way to Trenton. And that's how I feel about this right now. So if you sense a little passion in my voice and why this means so much to me, Amen. I want to make sure we've got the right candidate in. Because you know what happens when the right candidate gets in? There's over 5,000 people that shape the direction of what happens in the federal government that are picked by that person, and I want somebody that's not going to be making deals for those 5,000 people. I want somebody that's going to pick somebody of character, people of character in those positions to shape where our country goes. I would love somebody to have a proper understanding of the role of government. take those positions. To me, it's really, it's folks, it's really that basic. At least it is for at least Mike Hewitt. When I look at the government and say, what was the purpose of it? It's so lost. And
I agree. And the nice thing about Cruz is he memorized the Constitution, our original blueprint, when he was just in high school, and he's been living it and defending it ever since. First Amendment, Second Amendment rights, Fourth Amendment rights, all of them across the board, and he's done so in a statesmanlike manner.
So on a grassroots level, I've been in debates before where someone will say that's unconstitutional, and I'll say, okay, show me, and then you get, and then you get the deer in the headlight look. But if you have that debate with him, he's going to tell you, here it is. This is what it says. So listen.
Wouldn't that be refreshing?
Oh,
I think Georgia just passed a bill requiring that all their kids in fourth grade get a pocket Constitution for them to carry around. I think we're going to start looking at that in Michigan.
I give them out at Renegade River for free. I think it's a civic duty for folks to have that in their pocket, so that when they fly off the handle and say it's unconstitutional, they know what the heck they're talking about. But listen, Senator Patrick Colbeck, we're out of time. I genuinely appreciate what you're doing, both for the state of Michigan as a senator, but as a volunteer. Thank you very much, sir.
Hey, thank you for what you do, too. I mean, this is all about linking arms and getting out a good message to get us back restored to that shining city on a hill. Not to sound too eloquent, because engineers usually don't sound too eloquent anyway, but I'm passionate about this. We can be so much better than what we're doing today, and it takes getting the right people into office, which means that good people like yourself get engaged, and your listeners get engaged, and do the due diligence that you're talking about. Look at the actual record of people, not the rhetoric.
Amen. Senator Patrick Colbeck, thank you very much.
Hey, thank you. Knock 'em alive.
Folks, we'll be right back with the Enigma Report after these messages.
And now we return to the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by RenegadeRiver.com, and we are in segment 3. It is time for the Enigma Report. Brace yourself.
It is a scary thing, I'm telling you, folks. There's an enigma, and I mentioned it early on in the show today. I'm stuck. It's an enigma. I don't know whether to subtitle the show, this segment, "Why do we always do this backwards?" or "The wrong end of the stick." And my cohorts in the station this morning don't have a clue what I'm talking about. It's about marriage. Remember, you folks know that my passion is about saving the fabric of America, and I passionately believe that everything we do, the Cruz, the Trump, all of them, I don't think anyone's going to do anything until we save the American fabric, which is, in my mind, it's family. 48% babies last year born to unwed mothers. You folks hear me talk about all of that all the time. But what I want to talk about today is marriage, and I'm about the last person in the world that can give a lecture on marriage, so just know that. I prefaced this segment by admitting that up front. But when I look at why young folks get married, and by the way, why they don't get married, I find it fearsome, and I think it's incumbent upon parents. I've raised 4 daughters. I hope that I either showed them by my misdeeds or by my lessons with talking with them why marriage was so important and why it wasn't just some romantic thing that people do and then you go, why'd I do that? I think we really, really, really have got to slow down as parents and school our children on what marriage means. I really passionately do. When I say we're working on the wrong end of the stick, everywhere I've been driving, every time the concept of marriage comes up on the radio, anywhere I've heard it, by the way, it was from the divorce. Do you need a lawyer? Call 1-800, file a divorce. Everything was about the divorce. Men's lawyers, women's lawyers, everybody gets a lawyer. It was all about what to do. And I think, you know what, why are we focused on that end? Why aren't we, as a society, instead of worried about whether we've got no-fault divorce or whose fault it was, or what do we do with the kids now, instead of asking all of those, or the 47% of babies born to unwed mothers that have no intentions of getting married, what are we doing? As parents, you got teenage sons and daughters, younger than that, 4-year pack sitting in the studio with us right now. What are we doing as a society to have our children growing up wanting to embrace marriage with an honest understanding of what it means and what it is, rather than Cinderella's marriage and it's beautiful and then you come out from underneath the ether? because that's not what you thought it was. To me, a solid framework of going forward is built on a solid understanding of expectations. What do I expect? And if you've got a genuine understanding of what you should expect, rather than some romantic nonsense, I think marriage is a great, great thing. I honestly do. If you're going to have children, if that's your path forward in life, get married. But get married and have children. Hang on. Get married and then have children. And when you have your children, please, please, please passionately get them to understand the importance of marriage and what it means and what a partnership means. All of those things that cause us not to have 50+% divorces. So we're not running around going, what do you do about a divorce? How many kids in your classroom have you hear that constantly. If you've got third or fourth graders in your world, whether they're nieces, nephews, cousins, brothers, ask them how many people in their class are from a broken family. It's over 50%. And folks, we don't seem to have a grasp on what these things mean to us as individuals and to our society in total. I hear I was a panelist in a gun debate last week, and it's kind of what got me back on this track, because we keep asking the wrong questions about why there's violence. And I said, well, let's look a little bit closer. Why is there violence? Not just gun violence, folks, all violence. Why are people being violent? What would compel somebody to want to be violent, whether it's a baseball bat or a knife or a fighter or a gun, whatever the mechanism is? I don't care about that. What would cause a person to think this is a good idea? And then when I start looking at the percentages, listen, it's not like a little percentage. It's not like kind of close. It's overwhelming the result of what I believe is the onward march of the destruction of the American family. And I'm just telling you, I'm passionately telling you, if you got little kids, please raise them up to understand it and to love it and to embrace it, but to have honest expectations about what it is. Jim Riley?
You asked a question at the beginning of this, I think, very, very good Enigma report. But the question was, what are we doing to promote marriage? The answer is very simple. Our government, at just about every single level, even including at the elementary school level, celebrates not being married and rewards not only with cash, but with lifestyle and kudos and appreciation those folks who are not married. So, in fact, we got to where we are, I don't think by mistake. I think we got to where we are in terms of marriage being on the outs, and unmarried parents, and just non-marriage at all, but certainly unmarried parents, are being encouraged and rewarded by our government. Do we want to continue to do that?
Listen, I think there's a certain percentage in that. I can't debate it. But I will tell you this. The government didn't raise my daughters. I did. And the government didn't have a role. And if we, by the way, folks, I believe this too. If we allow our government to have a role in raising our children, shame on us. Shame on us. So my point is, the government didn't tell my daughters what their expectations should be with getting married or indeed not getting married. I think Jim's point goes to welfare, and he's well taken. I'm not debating it. But I think we've got a far greater problem as to what role our government has in our personal lives. It's what role are we having? You'll see, and by the way, me too, just so you know I'm not being hypocritical, 18, 19, 20-year-olds getting married, and we're all clapping, oh, good for you, good for you. Stop. An 18 or 19-year-old, myself included, have no concept of what expectations, what the expectations should be for marriage. It's some romantic novelty that people get themselves caught up in. And then as they go tell people, me and Sally Sue are going to get married, and everyone, oh, good for you, congratulations. And it's like Cinderella romance. It's just not a reality, because frankly, I don't think that we as parents, my parents included, did a very good job of slowing us down to navigation speed over the course of our life, not when we turned 18, but over the course of our life, demonstrating by action what good marriage is and what it can be for people. Because it's not just weight, burden, lawyers. There's a whole bunch of wonderful things that can come out of it. But I just don't think that as a society. I think that we've lost that element that causes us to train our children. I believe that. Listen, I joke often on the show, periodically, about the Walton family from the sitcom back in the 70s, where you had the grandparents and you had the parents and you had the children. Those societies, that society doesn't happen as much. Those folks taught their children by deed and by action, firsthand, not some storybook lesson over a beer the night before the person's going to get married. I just think that it's really easy as a culture to blame it onto somebody else or to think it's somebody else's fault. By the way, and Jim, not to take you on this, but it's easy to say the government did it. But like I said, the government has no role at the kitchen table when I'm talking to my daughters about what to expect in life. And if that conversation's happening in your family, I salute you, I applaud you. But if it isn't, please get on the stick. Because if you're old enough to have daughters and sons that you can talk to, you've already experienced some of life. Please share it with them. You know, I just think those lessons are important. Matt, you've got children, you've obviously got parents. What do you think?
Well, I think society's done this, not the government. I think the reason I say society is when you were a kid, or way back when Jim was still an adult when you were a kid, Mike, divorce was unacceptable. You know, it was frowned upon. Nowadays, like you said, they're advertising it. It's so acceptable that last year one of my players had to miss a game for his sister's wedding. Yeah. And the guys joked with him. They're like, dude, just catch the next one.
Yeah.
They actually said to him, catch the next wedding. She'll get married again.
Listen, to me, that's a culture in free fall. It is not a sustainable culture.
It's a societal issue. It's not a government issue.
Right. I believe that. And listen, again, I think Jim's right. I think money motivates and our government is paying for wrong activity. That said, this is a parent thing.
Yeah, but when you're talking about the single moms having kids because they want them, I'm not thinking about the lower class or whatever. I'm thinking about like the single late 30s, early 40s lady who never was more worried about career and wants to have that child so she's not alone when she gets older is what I'm thinking when you're talking about that single woman.
I got to tell you, I don't think I agree with you. When I look at the 47% last year, most of them were not teenage pregnancies. Most of them were adult females in their 20s and young 30s.
Yeah, that's
most of it is the result of, to me, in my mind, most of it's the result of irresponsibility. A passionate moment, and all of a sudden you got a problem.
Oh yeah.
I don't think it was I'm in my 30s and I'm starting to feel the time clock. Is there a percentage of it? Maybe, yeah. I don't dispute that, but I think most of it is people without any understanding or expectation about what the future is going to bring. So today's today. What do you mean tomorrow? I'm still enjoying today. So,
you mean there's a future with this action?
Well, listen. I understand. I've said this on the show before. I understand that sometimes in the course of life happens. And you can't with a little bit facetious, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. That said, what we do when we have children for tomorrow is really important. If we want our children to go forward, you've got a nice young man over there that's very patient every Wednesday sitting through the show.
Thanks.
But over the course of life, it's incumbent upon you and your wife, in my view, and it was me, and I hope I did an okay job. I don't think I did the job I wished I would have. But my daughters are all four successfully married. They have got children. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what the future will bring. But I think that we've absolutely got to get our hands around having conversations with 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds and 7-year-olds and 10-year-olds. And not only just the conversation, but having a conversation by demonstration, by showing them that this is work, but the work is worth it. That's what marriage is.
It's a job.
It's work, but it's worth it. The outcome. I got to tell you, folks, if we don't do that, I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters who we elect as a president or who wins, or I don't think any of that matters if we don't save the American family. Yep. I believe it. So let's quit arguing about divorce and start trying to debate how we can save marriage. That's how I'm seeing it. In the meantime, do me a favor. Find me on Twitter at Talk Mike Hewitt. Find me on Facebook /The Mike Hewitt Show. And folks, I'm going to be back on Friday morning arguing with Jim Riley at 8 a.m. Folks, see you then. Thanks a lot.